Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that your entire country, I mean, almost every single citizen, your neighbors, your family, has just lost their entire life savings overnight.
Right. It's a terrifying thought.
And I don't mean, a stock market dip. I mean, the money is just completely gone.
Evaporated.
Exactly. The government essentially dissolves. Armories are being looted by ordinary people, and your nation is just teetering on the absolute brink of a full-blown civil war.
It sounds like the plot of a dystopian novel.
It really does. But
Yeah.
why did it happen? Not because of an invading army, right? But
Right.
because the entire country fell for a massive, unchecked Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, operating without any financial safety nets whatsoever. It's a very real historical event.
Welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. Today, we are looking at how a country survives something exactly like that. Because for you, the listener, we have a truly unique setup today.
We really do. The sources provided for this are incredibly dense.
Oh, dense is an understatement. You sent us this fascinating stack of sources. It's a meticulously designed academic presentation outline, and it is backed by this massive, almost intimidating data set of global socioeconomic indicators.
Yeah, we're talking about thousands of rows of raw quantitative data. It's a remarkable collection.
So many spreadsheets.
Right, exactly. We're looking at variables that track everything from, political regime durability to mortality rates, from corruption indices to agricultural employment percentages.
It's an entirely quantitative lens, and our mission today is to take this raw, objective data and use it to decode the cross-century transformation of a single nation, Albania.
From 1946 all the way up to projections for 2025.
Right. We are tracing its journey from being this absolute totalitarian fortress completely cut off from the rest of the world to what is now emerging as a Balkan star.
And what's fascinating is that looking at this through a giant spreadsheet reveals things that normal history books just completely miss.
Yeah, because history books usually give us, narratives, right?
Exactly. They give us the speeches, the personalities of the leaders, the ideological battles. But data strips all of that away.
It forces you to just look at the math.
It forces us to confront what actually happened on the ground. When you look at the raw numbers, you start to see these hidden miracles of human resilience.
And some pretty devastating societal illusions, too, right? Illusions that were completely masked by political rhetoric.
Absolutely.
Okay, so how do we even begin to break down an 80-year timeline using a data set this massive? Where does the story actually start in the numbers?
Well, if we look at the macro level data, the trajectory naturally divides itself into three very distinct, highly contrasting phases.
Okay, lay them out for me.
The first is a period of intense socialist control. That runs from roughly 1946 to 1990. And in the data set, this era is marked by extreme, almost flatline stability.
Right, but accompanied by total isolation.
Unprecedented isolation, yes. It's a highly locked down system.
The ultimate closed system, like a society trapped in amber.
That's a good way to put it. Then the second phase hits. This is the turbulent transition period, running from 1991 to 2000.
And looking at the charts here, this is where the lines just go completely haywire.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It features the most violent data fluctuations in the entire century.
Just spikes and crashes everywhere.
Right. And finally, we have the third phase, the European integration period, from 2001 pushing toward 2025.
Where we see those wildly oscillating numbers slowly, and I mean agonizingly slowly, begin to drift towards standard European averages.
Yes. So let's start with that first massive shift, moving from that flatline stability of the isolated era right into the 1990s.
Yeah, because there is a specific metric in your data set that completely threw me off when I saw it.
You're talking about a p_polity2 variable.
Yes, the p-polity2 score. It's a standard academic score used to measure how democratic or autocratic a country's governance system is, right?
Correct. It's a widely used index in political science. It runs on a scale from -10, which is a pure hereditary or totalitarian autocracy, all the way up to +10.
Which is a perfect democracy.
Right. +10 represents a fully consolidated competitive democracy. It measures things like, the competitiveness of political participation.
Like having multiple parties.
Exactly. The openness of executive recruitment and the constraints on the chief executive.
Okay, so I'm looking at the score for Albania in 1990, and the score is a -9.
Near the absolute bottom.
I mean, that is the absolute totalitarian bottom. That is a state with zero political competition, zero executive constraints, just total
Yep.
top-down control.
Right.
But then you move exactly one column over in the spreadsheet just 12 months later. In 1991, the score instantly leaps to a +1.
A jump from -9 to +1 in a single calendar year.
It's a shocking numerical jump.
It really is. In the world of political science datasets, a +1 places the country in the category of a transitional democracy.
Meaning what, exactly?
It means they suddenly have competitive elections, multiple parties, and a fundamental shift in how power is supposed to be transferred.
Wait, a 10-point jump in 12 months? That looks like they just reached over and flipped a switch from dark to light.
From a lockdown fortress to a competitive democracy overnight.
But looking at this, I have to be honest, I'm highly skeptical. Can a society truly rewrite its entire DNA in 12 months?
You have every reason to be skeptical.
Yeah.
And that is exactly where the raw data tells a much deeper story than just the headline number.
Because it feels like taking an old house, right? The
Mhm.
foundation is crumbling, the plumbing is from the 1940s.
Right.
And you just slap a brand new coat of high-gloss paint on the front door and declare, hey, we have a modern mansion.
Yeah. The outside looks great.
But if a storm hits, that house is coming down.
That is a very apt way to look at it. To see the reality behind that sudden democratic upgrade, we have to look at an accompanying variable in the data set,
Which one?
the FEM_durable variable, regime durability.
Okay, what does that measure?
It tracks the number of years since the last fundamental regime transition. It is effectively a measure of institutional memory and the stability of the governing structure.
So it's how long the system has been continuously operating without breaking down.
Precisely. For decades leading up to 1990, Albania's durability score was steadily climbing. It was a highly durable, deeply entrenched system.
Sure, because it was completely locked down.
Right. But in 1991, at the exact moment the democracy score spiked to +1, the regime durability score in the dataset instantly reset to 0.
0. Just wiped completely clean.
Yes. And to understand what a reset to 0 actually entails for a society, we need to think about what institutions really are.
They aren't just buildings.
Exactly. We aren't just talking about a building with a flag on it. We are talking about the invisible rules of the game.
So what does a 0 look like on the ground?
When a state resets to 0, it means there are no independent courts with a history of unbiased rulings. There are no regulatory bodies that actually know how to audit a private company.
Oh, wow.
There are no civic organizations experienced in holding leaders accountable.
So they have the legal right to vote, but absolutely none of the actual plumbing required to make a democracy function safely.
It was a dimensional strike on the nation. The speed of this institutional track change was globally unprecedented.
They just dismantled everything.
They dismantled a heavily entrenched centralized apparatus and swapped it for a democratic model practically overnight. But by resetting that institutional memory to 0, well, it practically guaranteed the extreme fragility and chaos of the decade that followed.
They achieved the procedures of democracy in record time. They could hold an election.
Yes, but the substance, the actual governance was entirely hollow.
And that misalignment, right, between the blinding speed of political change and the absolute absence of institutional durability, that set the stage for one of the most volatile economic decades any country has ever experienced.
It did. Because when you think about it, a fragile government usually means a fragile economy.
If the political foundation is at 0, the economic superstructure is going to be incredibly unstable.
Exactly. And to see how that instability manifested, we can turn to the World Bank's data on gross domestic product growth rates, the WDI_GDPGR variable.
Right.
When a centrally planned economy is suddenly dismantled, economists expect what we call a transition shock.
And this chart gives you absolute whiplash. In 1991, the year they flipped the democracy switch, the GDP growth rate drops into a massive negative number.
The economy essentially falls off a cliff.
Why is it so severe?
Well, in a command economy, the state owns the enterprises, right? They dictate the supply chains and they control the prices.
The government is the only buyer and seller.
Yes. So when you remove that control overnight, without a private market ready to take its place, factories simply stop.
Supply chains disintegrate.
Exactly. Price controls evaporate, which leads to rampant inflation. The immediate result is a severe contraction in output.
It sounds incredibly painful for the average person.
It was.
But then I'm looking further down the column. Just 2 years later, in 1993, there is this staggering bounce in the data.
Ah, yes.
The GDP growth rate rockets up to positive 9.6%. Now, hold on. If I see a 9.6% growth rate today, I'm thinking a country just discovered massive oil reserves or invented cold fusion.
Right. It sounds like an economic miracle.
It sounds incredible. Is it real?
It does look like a miracle on paper,
Right.
but we have to contextualize it against the massive collapse of 1991 and 92.
Okay, so it's a trick of the math.
In economics, we define this specific phenomenon as compensatory growth.
Explain that, because 9.6% is huge no matter how you slice it.
Think about it this way. Imagine a factory that produces 100 tractors a year.
Okay, 100 tractors.
During the transition shock of 1991, the state stops funding it, the supply chain breaks, and the factory shuts down completely. Production drops to zero.
0 tractors.
Right. Then, in 1993, someone figures out how to source a few parts, and the factory manages to build just 10 tractors.
Ah. Mathematically, going from 0 to 10 is an infinite percentage increase.
Exactly. When an economy is operating from a near-zero baseline, simply turning the lights back on in a few shuttered industries creates a massive relative growth percentage.
But they're still only making 10 tractors instead of 100.
Precisely. It does not represent an actual structural leap in national productivity. They haven't built a robust new economic engine. They are simply recovering a tiny fraction of lost ground.
So it's the illusion of a boom.
Yes.
The data looks incredible, but the reality on the ground is still incredibly bleak. It's like a patient whose heart stopped, right? And the monitor suddenly shows a faint pulse.
Right.
It's a huge improvement over 0, but the patient is still in critical condition in the ICU.
That false confidence is exactly what makes compensatory growth so dangerous. People see the numbers and think the crisis is over.
And in this specific historical context, that illusion of an economic boom led directly to the defining tragedy of the era.
Which brings us back to where we started this deep dive, the 1997 crisis.
Because when I look at the GDP growth rate for 1997, the line vertically plummets from that positive growth down to negative 10.9%.
Is a total freefall.
What actually triggers a near 11% economic contraction in a single year? That's apocalyptic.
To understand the 1997 collapse, we have to look at another critical metric in the data set, the VDEM_core variable.
The Corruption Perception Index.
Yes. Which also serves as a proxy for the absence of regulatory oversight. During this entire period of so-called economic recovery in the early 90s, this corruption metric remained extremely high.
So the government is completely failing to regulate the new free market.
The government didn't just fail to regulate it. In many ways, the government didn't even understand it.
What do you mean?
You have to remember the context provided in your sources. You have a population that has spent over 4 decades in a rigidly controlled socialist economy.
Right.
Private capital, private investment, interest rates. These concepts literally did not exist for them.
It's like a foreign language.
Completely. They had zero financial literacy regarding free market risks.
So they were completely naive to the dangers of capitalism.
Precisely. And into that massive regulatory void stepped the financial pyramid schemes.
The Ponzi schemes. We mentioned these at the start.
Yes. But we are not talking about a few shady individuals operating out of a basement here.
These are big operations.
These were massive, highly visible organizations that promised astronomical monthly returns, sometimes as high as 10 to 25% a month.
45% a month. That's impossible.
Of course it is. But because the newly formed fragile government did absolutely nothing to shut them down, the public assumed these schemes were legitimate.
Oh, wow.
Many even believed the government implicitly endorsed them.
Because, I mean, if you've lived your whole life under a system where the government controls everything,
Right.
and suddenly there's a bank out in the open offering you 20% returns and the government isn't stopping it, you naturally assume the government approves of it.
Exactly. It was a catastrophic failure of institutional protection. A huge portion of the population sold everything they had.
Everything.
They sold their apartments, they sold their livestock, they poured every penny of their life savings into these schemes. They thought this was just how capitalism worked.
They thought this was the magic of the free market.
Yes.
But mathematically, a Ponzi scheme always collapses. There's no escaping the math.
Always. In early 1997, the math caught up. The schemes ran out of new investors to pay off the old ones, and they collapsed entirely.
How big was the fallout?
The total liabilities of these schemes amounted to nearly half of the country's GDP.
Half the GDP?
Yes.
That is incomprehensible. Half the wealth of the nation just tied up in a scam?
The result was the complete evaporation of the nation's wealth. The anger and despair were so profound that the country was brought to the absolute brink of civil war.
The armories being looted.
Citizens looted military armories. The government temporarily lost control of large swaths of the country, and the economy contracted by that devastating 10.9%.
It's the lethal consequence of what we talked about earlier. They had procedural democracy. The Papality 2 score was positive,
Right.
but they entirely lacked the thick institutions required for market regulation and oversight. They installed a brand new operating system, but left out the firewall.
And a massive virus completely destroyed the hard drive.
Exactly.
That is the tragedy of the 1990s captured in data. The 1997 collapse is the ultimate empirical proof that you cannot build a functional free market without simultaneously building the regulatory state to govern it.
You need the referees, not just the players.
Precisely.
And an economic collapse of that magnitude doesn't just destroy bank accounts, right? It destroys the social fabric of a nation.
Oh, fundamentally.
Which leads me to wonder, how do you even begin to measure the psychological damage of something like that? Can data even show that?
We can actually measure it. The data set includes figures from the World Values Survey, specifically tracking variables related to interpersonal and institutional trust, as well as overall life satisfaction.
The WVS_trust and WVS_SATLIF variables.
Yes.
I am looking at these metrics right after 1997, and the line just drops to the floor. It hits absolute rock bottom, the freezing point of trust.
What the data captures here is the shattering of the social contract. Think about the psychological impact your state's institutions failed spectacularly.
They let you get robbed.
The government failed to protect you from unregulated fraud. You lost everything. A profound psychological shift occurs in that environment.
You stop trusting the government, obviously.
But more devastatingly, you stop trusting each other. When resources become that scarce and institutions vanish, survival becomes highly individualistic. The communal bonds that had historically held the society together through isolation and poverty were fundamentally broken.
So if you can't trust the government and you can't trust your neighbor and your money is gone, what do?
You leave.
You leave. And the data shows this with brutal clarity. I'm looking at the net migration figures, the WDI_migration variable.
The outmigration figures are staggering. Throughout the early 1990s and peaking again post-1997, we see massive negative values in net migration.
We are talking about hundreds of thousands of people simply packing up and leaving the country entirely.
It's not just a trend, it's an exodus.
And here's a deeper insight from the sources that really stuck with me. For every incremental percentage point of democratization gained in that early transition.
Every uptick in political freedom.
Exactly. The country paid for it with the physical loss of thousands of its most vital citizens.
A severe hemorrhagic brain drain.
Yeah. The laborers, the intellectuals, the youth, the very people required to build those missing institutions were the ones leaving to find stability elsewhere.
They couldn't afford to wait 3 generations for the regime durability score to tick up. They had to feed their families today.
But not everyone could leave, right? Some people had to stay. And for the people who stayed behind, there is a highly unusual anomaly in the labor structure data that I really want to dig into.
Yeah.
Because it contradicts everything I thought I knew about how economies develop.
You were referring to the employment distribution between agriculture and the service sector.
Right. The WFA_Empagger and EMSER variables. Because in standard development economics, the trajectory of a modernizing nation is almost always linear.
Right. Farm to factory to office.
People move from rural farms into urban factories, and then eventually, as the country gets wealthier, they move into the service industry in the cities. It's a continuous process of urbanization.
That is the standard global model. But the data here shows a severe regression.
In the early 90s, the agricultural employment variable actually spikes. People are fleeing the cities and going back to the farms. It is literal reverse urbanization.
It is.
How does that even happen? If the state factories collapse, how do urban workers suddenly become farmers? Do they just walk into a field and start planting?
Well, it's a testament to human survival instincts. During the socialist era, the agricultural sector was entirely collectivized.
State-owned farms.
Exactly. When the state collapsed, the collective farms were rapidly and often chaotically decollectivized and distributed back to individual families.
So the land was suddenly available?
Yes. And when the state-owned industries in the cities collapsed in the early 90s, and then the financial system collapsed in 1997.
The cities had nothing to offer.
The urban centers offered nothing but unemployment, inflation, and chaos. There were no safety nets. So the population retreated to the one thing that could guarantee basic survival.
Subsistence agriculture.
Exactly. They utilized those newly redistributed plots of land to simply feed themselves.
It was a defensive crouch by an entire society. I mean, they have a modern democratic constitution on paper, but a labor force reverting to agrarian survival.
And the data shows this holding pattern lasted a very long time.
How long?
The society was effectively stuck in this survival mode for decades. It wasn't until after 2010 that the labor force finally and rapidly began to evolve toward the service industry.
2010.
It took nearly 20 years to correct that defensive agrarian regression.
Okay, let me pause and summarize what the data has shown us so far, because it's grim. We have an economy that crashed repeatedly,
Yes.
a population fleeing in a mass exodus, social trust evaporating to absolute zero, and a labor force that had to retreat to subsistence farming just to avoid starvation.
It's a bleak picture.
The obvious question looking at this terrifying X-ray is, how did the country survive it all? Why didn't the state just completely cease to exist?
It's a profound question.
Yeah.
And to answer why the state did not experience total systemic death, we have to look beneath the highly volatile economic and political indicators.
What are we looking for?
We need to examine the foundational human capital variables.
Right, because this is where the data reveals something totally unexpected. I want to look at the education data.
The WDI_Expedu variable.
Yeah, education expenditure as a percentage of GDP. Unsurprisingly, during the transition shock and the chaos of the 90s, this number plummets. The state has no money, so funding for public schools dries up.
A standard casualty of severe economic collapse.
But then, defying all logic, we look at the adult literacy rate, the WDI_literate variable. While the funding drops off a cliff, the literacy rate remains remarkably high.
It stays stubbornly above 90% throughout the entire period of chaos.
And we see an identical, highly counterintuitive trend in the public health data. If we examine life expectancy at birth, the WDI_lifex variable, the trajectory is extraordinary.
It really is.
In 1960, life expectancy was around 62 years. By the 2020s, it has grown to almost 79 years.
And the curve doesn't break.
Right. Even through the regime collapse, the 1997 anarchy, the massive outmigration life expectancy and steady health investments, like the Holco_Hele metric, they maintain their structural integrity.
It's a steady upward slope.
How is that functionally possible? Your government is collapsing, people are fleeing, but everyone can still read and people are living longer.
To explain this, we must adhere to a strictly objective analysis of the historical data, specifically regarding the pre-1990 era.
The socialist period.
Yes. Regardless of the severe political realities of that period, the data dictates a fascinating structural conclusion.
Which is?
The highly centralized regime prior to 1990 prioritized a massive, heavy investments in foundational human capital. Specifically, the eradication of basic diseases through universal public health initiative and universal basic literacy through mandatory education.
So from a purely mechanical standpoint, they built a baseline of biological and intellectual health.
Exactly. And while the economic system of that era ultimately stagnated, the human infrastructure they built was incredibly robust.
It was built to last.
When the capitalist transition occurred, bringing all its attendant chaos and volatility, this pre-existing foundational human capital actually functioned as the ultimate shock absorber.
The ultimate shock absorber.
Yes. Think about it. A highly literate population can adapt to new circumstances, learn new skills, and navigate chaos far better than an illiterate one.
That makes sense.
A healthy population does not succumb to mass epidemics during periods of state weakness. This legacy of human capital provided a floor that the society could not fall beneath.
It kept the nation afloat when the financial and political institutions failed entirely.
It is a massive paradox. The highly controlled system of the past inadvertently built the exact survival gear the population needed to survive the collapse of that very system.
The data just shows that a healthy, reading population can survive an economic earthquake.
It is a testament to the fact that human development indicators often move on a completely different, deeper tectonic plate than political or economic indicators.
Regimes change overnight, but a population's baseline health and literacy provide a deeply entrenched resilience.
Yes, exactly.
Which brings us to where the country is today. Let's fast forward our timeline into the 21st century.
A third phase.
Right. The turbulence of the 90s is largely in the rearview mirror. The nation has stabilized, it's modernizing. The world is starting to look at it as a success story, a rising star in the region.
The Balkan Star.
But the data reveals some really stubborn, lingering contradictions.
Let us return to our very first variable, the Polity to Democracy score.
Oh, this one is wild.
By the 2010s, Albania achieves a robust score of +9.
+9. That is just 1 point shy of a perfect consolidated democracy. The system isn't just running, it's fully optimized.
On paper, yes.
But here is where it gets really interesting. You would assume a +9 democracy score means a clean, fully transparent government.
One would assume.
But we pull up the VDEM_core corruption perception index again, and it refuses to drop. It stays stubbornly high, completely ignoring the +9 democracy score.
It's a stark contrast.
I don't understand how those two metrics can coexist. How can you be highly democratic and highly corrupt at the same time?
This is a classic manifestation of what political scientists call the high democracy, high challenge quadrant.
Okay, unpack that for me.
What the +9 signifies is that the procedural mechanics of democracy are fully compliant. Elections are held regularly, votes are counted accurately, power transfers peacefully, opposition parties function freely.
The basic rules of the game are established and respected.
Okay, the gears are turning.
But substantive governance quality, the actual eradication of deep-seated corruption, the implementation of blind justice, the removal of patronage networks has not caught up.
It goes back to the durability issue.
This points back to our earlier discussion on institutional durability. You can achieve a +9 procedural score in a decade. But eradicating corruption requires building an independent judiciary that absolutely cannot be bought.
Right.
It requires a culture of absolute transparency in public procurement. That takes generations.
So they have mastered the rules of the game, but they are still struggling to ensure the referees aren't taking bribes.
Precisely. The formal institutions exist, but the informal practices of patronage still linger. It is the long, hard slog of moving from procedural democracy to substantive governance.
Now, I want to bring up another modern statistic from the data set that looks incredibly triumphant on the surface. But given our conversation, I suspect there is a catch.
What's the metric?
I'm looking at the WDI_ LRenew variable, the percentage of electricity production from renewable sources.
Yes.
The number here is astronomically high. It's almost 100%. Are they secret climate pioneers? Did they figure out the green transition before the rest of Europe?
It is a remarkable statistic, but we have to look at the causality behind it.
There's a catch.
The data point is entirely accurate, but this high percentage of renewable energy is not born from proactive, modern environmental policy or massive recent investments in green tech.
And then where does it come from?
It is largely a geographic resource endowment.
Geography over policy.
Correct. The country possesses massive, powerful river systems. During the 20th century, a vast network of hydroelectric dams was constructed.
Oh, I see.
Therefore, their baseline electricity grid has always been dominated by hydropower. It is a natural green baseline.
So they started on third base when it comes to green energy. That sounds like a good problem to have.
It is an advantage, but relying solely on this endowment presents a severe modern vulnerability.
How so?
Hydropower is incredibly susceptible to climate change and seasonal droughts. If the rivers run low, the grid fails, and they are forced to import expensive energy.
Right, because they don't have a backup.
The real modern challenge for the nation isn't resting on this high renewable baseline, but actively diversifying that grid into wind and solar.
The data is so unforgiving. Even a near-perfect green energy number has a hidden vulnerability underneath it.
It always requires deeper context.
Which brings us to the final phase of our timeline. We are looking at the present day, projecting out to 2025 and even 2050. What is the overarching national project right now?
The ultimate goal is full integration into the European Union.
Right.
And the dataset provides a fascinating way to track this through the EU_compliance indicators. These represent the vast body of common rights, legal standards, and market regulations that bind all EU member states together.
I am looking at these variables, and it's like watching a really slow progress bar on a massive computer download.
That's a great analogy.
In the early 2000s, almost all of these compliance indicators for human rights, market openness, and legal harmonization are marked non-compliant.
Right across the board.
Then, post-2010, you see them slowly ticking over to partially compliant. It's not a dramatic jump like the democracy score in 1991. It is a slow, agonizingly quantitative path.
Because EU integration is not about flipping a political switch. It is entirely about institutional thickness.
There's no shortcut.
The EU demands that a nation's regulatory bodies, judicial standards, and marking mechanisms align perfectly with Brussels. You cannot fake compliance.
Right, they check everything.
That is why it is an agonizing step-by-step slog. It is the hard, unglamorous work of building that substantive democracy we discussed earlier.
But just as they're finally getting the institutions right, just as the EU progress bar is moving, the data reveals a new shadow.
Yes, the demographic data.
Let's pivot to the future population projections in the dataset because this looks deeply concerning.
This is perhaps the most critical insight in the entire dataset regarding the future. We look at the demographic projections for 2030 and 2050, the WBP_POP variables.
If you draw the population pyramids for 2020 versus the projection for 2050, if you compare them, it's alarming.
Very.
A healthy population pyramid is wide at the bottom, lots of young people, and narrow at the top. But the 2050 projection is widening significantly at the top.
The WPP_median age variable is rising steadily. The country is aging, and it's aging rapidly.
This represents the second massive historical test for the nation. Just as they had to survive the transition shock of the 1990s, they are now facing the loss of their demographic dividend.
What exactly happens when a country loses its demographic dividend?
Well, a demographic dividend occurs when a country has a large, young, working-age population relative to its elderly dependents. It's a massive engine for economic growth, innovation, and tax revenue.
It is the fuel of modernization.
But remember our earlier discussion about the mass migration of the 1990s and 2000s?
The brain drain. The massive exodus of youth.
Yes. The historical outmigration of youth, combined with a modern decline in fertility rates, means that demographic dividend is expiring prematurely.
So they don't have the workers to replace the ones retiring.
An aging population presents a profound economic headwind for the 2030s and beyond.
Because you have fewer workers supporting more retirees, the healthcare costs rise while the tax base shrinks.
Exactly. So the human shock absorbers that saved them in the 1990s, the healthy, literate youth, are aging out. And they weren't replaced because so many left to find stability elsewhere.
It is the ultimate race against time. They must complete their institutional modernization and EU integration, effectively raising their economic productivity enough to support an aging society before the demographic clock runs out.
It is a profound challenge. They have built the political framework, but they must rapidly increase their economic efficiency to counterbalance the shrinking workforce.
Okay, we need to take a breath and synthesize this incredible journey.
It's been a long road.
From 1946 to 2025, from a lockdown, totally isolated system, through the absolute whiplash and chaos of the 1990s, the Ponzi schemes, the mass exodus,
The reverse urbanization.
and now a stabilizing nation currently racing against a demographic clock to join the European Union. Looking at this massive stack of variables, what is the ultimate takeaway? What is the lesson of this data for you, the listener?
If there is one core thesis to extract from this data, it is this speed does not equal depth.
Speed does not equal depth.
As the data proved in 1991, political regimes can be swapped overnight. You can change a constitution and hold an election in 12 months.
Right, you can flip the Polity 2 score.
But building durable economic governance, establishing deep societal trust, and eradicating corruption requires the relentless, unglamorous effort of 3 generations.
Speed does not equal depth. That is powerful. Because by 2025, the data shows the country has largely left the violent turbulence behind.
Yes, the lines are stabilizing.
But its future growth, its ability to survive the aging of its population, won't depend on the speed of change anymore. It's going to depend entirely on the thickness of its institutions.
Precisely. The data reveals that the societal bones are finally healing. But the density of that bone, the institutional thickness, is what will determine if the nation can bear the weight of the future.
So what does this all mean for you, listening to this deep dive? It's easy to look at a single country's history as an isolated case study.
But it's not isolated.
The mechanics of this data apply everywhere. So here's a final thought for you to mull over today.
The data never lies. It just waits for time to fulfill its promises.
Exactly. Think about your own country. Think about your own organization or even your own industry. We live in a world that loves rapid disruption.
We love moving fast.
We love flipping switches and declaring victory. But look around at the changes you are experiencing right now. Are they just numerical jumps on a spreadsheet?
Are they just procedural updates running on fragile hardware?
Or have you actually built the durable, thick institutions, the deep trust, the boring but essential regulations required to actually survive the next century? Because as the numbers clearly show, reality always catches up. Make sure your foundations are thick.